Okay. Okay, awesome. So, oh, you can see my ladder in the background. Okay, that's Jacob's ladder I put over there. I borrowed it from him. It could go very high. Always interesting what you can see in a Zoom. So welcome to chapter 2. As I have discussed in the previous weeks, what we are at in the Tanya so far is really laying the groundwork, getting a very good understanding of our inner workings, and then we can understand our mission as it pertains to our inside. As we've said many times, Tanya, the Hasidic philosophy, believes it's not just our actions, but what goes on internally. And of course, as you may know, what goes on internally has an effect on your actions. So they go hand in hand. Today's class, well, I should say last week, we finished discussing the animalistic soul. The animal soul, we discussed its 4 elements, which from it come all evil things, which of course the basis of everything is ego. We also discussed the good that can also come from it. We discussed the uniqueness of the Jewish animal soul, and we discussed how the animal soul is not technically evil, but led to its own devices. It will ultimately lead you on an evil path because it's completely self-focused. This week, we're going to start with the godly soul. So let's start with a story. There's a story that those of you that know, the Rabbi would stand every Sunday for many years and give out dollars, hand out dollars to people to give to charity. Many hours he would stand giving dollars every Sunday morning. And the Rebbe wasn't young. Okay, the last year the Rebbe was giving out dollars, he was 90. Okay, so the Rebbe wasn't young. So he's giving out dollars every week, and standing there for hours. In fact, they say after he would give out dollars, he would ice his whole hand. He would ice it because it would hurt so much from giving out dollars for hours. But he would stand, not sit, stand and hand out dollars. So one time a lady came to the Rebbe and she said, "How is it that you stand here for so many hours? Maybe give it to someone else. If you just want to give $1 to charity, just sit there and watch as someone else is giving them the dollars. Why do you have to give them each $1 yourself?" And the Rebbe gave the famous answer that when you're counting diamonds, you don't get tired, right? You're counting diamonds, you don't get tired. If you have a lot of diamonds in your bank, if you're Scrooge McDuck or whatever he is, right? If you have a lot of diamonds, or today you might say eggs, if you have a lot of eggs in your refrigerator, you won't get tired counting them because each one is so precious to you. And this is really what we're talking about, the diamond. What does it mean the Rebbe said when you're counting diamonds? Were all these people diamonds? Were all these people good people? All these people that came for dollars? Maybe some of them did a lot of bad things. What does it mean that they're diamonds? And this is what the second chapter of Tanya is going to tell us, that every Jew is a diamond. Every Jew is a diamond by virtue of their godly soul, which we're going to discuss. And so the beginning of chapter 2, we're going to discuss the godly soul itself. In other words, what is a godly soul? What is it made out of? How do you manufacture a godly soul, right? If you had to manufacture a godly soul, what would you do? Probably there's a, element of God in there, but how many, inactive ingredients, so to speak. And second of all, if we all have a godly soul, are we all equal in that regard, in that respect? Because to be honest, there are some greater people and some lesser people, or at least so it seems, right? You would think maybe some people get a better godly soul than others. And if that's the case, are some people more naturally godly, greater diamonds than others? How does it work? We want to understand. In other words, we want to understand this godly soul. Exactly what is it? How does it operate? And will there be differences between the different Jewish people based on maybe their type of godly soul that they might have? So this is all what we're going to discuss. Is that someone by the door? Can you go help? Okay. No? Okay. Just you. Okay. Okay, so before we get inside the text, many people are familiar with what we call the gastronomic Jew, right? The gastronomic Jew is the Jew in his stomach, the Jew who, eats gefilte fish, matzo balls, and eats corned beef and deli, the gastronomic Jew. But we all also know there's what we call a Jew in the heart, right? People tell me, Rabbi, I'm a Jew in my heart. All right, this is a good story. Usually people are telling me that because they don't want to do something. I'm offering them to put on tefillin. They say, Rabbi, it's okay, I don't need to put on tefillin, I'm a Jew in my heart. But they're actually onto something. There's something we call the Jewish heart or the Jewish spark, right? When you see someone who's like awakened, you say, oh, their Jewish spark has awakened, or their Jewish heart. So what exactly is this Jewish heart that people talk about? What exactly is this Jewish spark? Is it just brainwashing by our parents? What do you think? I would have to say no. I have my reasons why not. But in other words, can you say that really there is no such thing as a Jewish heart, no such thing as a Jewish spark, no such thing as a Jewish soul? Maybe it's just brainwashing passed from our parents. Why would would you agree with that? Some of you have been brainwashed by your parents, right? So you carry all the guilt and the trauma and everything else from generations.
No, I would think that the Jewish heart puts family in front of everything and God, family and God in front of everything.
It's one element.
Really,
it's one element of the Jewish heart, but you have, this is where I'm going to do. You have people who did not grow up with any knowledge of Judaism, and yet they awaken. They get a moment of awakening, a moment of clarity, and they decide to connect to their Jewish soul. I spoke about this on Shabbos in my sermon, a couple of stories, but a more, yes, Baruch?
They clearly have a neshama, because people react to things that you wouldn't expect them to react to. So you go to the coastal, you're not a religious Jew, and all of a sudden you break down in tears. What's that about? It's a pile of rocks. It's a historical landmark. It's, it doesn't really, like, there's not a rational explanation for certain behaviors and things that people say and do.
Good. Very good. Great examples. Yep, there's no rational explanation for certain behaviors that people do. You have as well, what was a story? What was that story that came to mind? Obviously, throughout history, Jewish people put in terrible situations. The Holocaust, you can see it as well. People weren't religious, stood up for their faith. There's so many stories of that throughout all the generations. It's always happened. Like Bruce said, you have sometimes people's souls awaken. You have, and so this is all evidence of the fact that there's something more. Oh, the story I was thinking of was there was a minister in the government in Hungary, of the far right party, anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic, a lot of things. I think his name was Viktor Orban. I forget his name. You can look him up. And one day he finds out that he's Jewish. Okay, so what's a rational explanation to that? Well, you just hide it. Don't tell anybody. Or if you find out, run away from it. Like if you really hate Jews, but suddenly he decides, he turns around his life and he becomes religious. Like, what the heck? He wasn't brainwashed, about the Jewish heart. But there was something in his soul. He found out about it, and his soul awakened, and he connected to his Judaism.
Yeah, he wasn't connected to whatever it was that he was.
Right.
He was missing something.
Yep. And this Jewish soul is what has kept us as a nation. In fact, to Bruce's point a moment ago, you'll even find certain Jews who will talk all day and tell you how they're atheists and they don't believe in anything Jewish and yada. But the moment you tell them that they're not Jewish, they'll get so upset at you. And you'd be like, why? You don't do anything Jewish. You don't believe in anything Jewish. Like, well, what's wrong if I tell you, no, I'm Jewish. I'm born in Jewish. Like, who cares? Like, who cares? It's a religion, right? No, like it bothers them, it bothers them. So it's a very interesting phenomenon. And again, this all comes back to the Jewish soul. It's really part of the Jewish soul that was always there. So the question is, what is this Jewish soul made out of? So the Alter Rebbe will tell us in a moment. What we're going to get inside, he's going to tell us this Jewish soul. You know what it's made out of? You know what its recipe is? It's a piece of God. Now, you're going to tell me everything is a piece of God. We're going to have to explain, not necessarily to that extent, but we're first going to explain what it means that a Jewish soul is a piece of God. A Jewish soul, he says, and he places down, is a piece of God. Let's take a look just for a moment in the Tanya, in the beginning, and then we'll get to some of his proofs. But let me open up. So if you have the Tanya in front of you, it'll be on the first page. And I really should.
44?
Yeah, 44.
44. Thanks.
44, yeah, 44. Okay.
44.
Okay. So let's take a look here. Okay. In chapter 1, the Tanya introduced us to Rabbi Chaim Vital's doctrine of two souls. We learned that the first animal soul is driven by egocentric energy called Klipa and is largely responsible for bad temperaments. In this chapter, we will examine the second divine soul. And he says the second soul in the Israelite is a piece of God above. That comes from the book of Job, mamish literally. So your soul is literally a piece of God. Now the Alter Rebbe adds the word literally, okay? In other words, in the verse, it just says it is a piece of God above. And the book of Job, he's adding the word
Divine.
literally,
Yeah.
okay? Now, just to explain to you, the technical verse, in case you want to look it up in Job, the technical verse in Job is actually, if you read the verse on a simple level in context, what it's talking about is Job was complaining to God and saying, what portion is God giving me, right? Remember, he had a bad portion from God, so to speak, right? He didn't sin, and he was, so to speak, complaining to God. He says, what type of sin are you giving? What type of difficulties are you giving me? However, although that's what it means in context, the Kabbalists are not saying the proof that a soul is a portion of God is from the book of Job. But like I said, Judaism, we like to use lingo of verses when we want to describe something. So the lingo of the verse saying Chelek Elokam Imal, it's a portion of God above, is good lingo to describe what Kabbalah knows to be the truth about a godly soul. So again, in context, doesn't mean that. So if you're going to look it up, you'll see like what are you talking about. This is not the proof. In fact, the Alter Rebbe will show us two places where we see that a soul is a piece of God. But the point is, if you want to describe what is a soul, you will say a soul is Chelek Elokah Mimal. It is a piece of God above, and mamish literally. It is literally a piece of God above. Okay. Now, generally, human beings, their soul is greater than animal souls because of our intellect, right? Intellect alone. And however, by Jewish people, we're saying it's not just that we have the intellect, but we have another soul, which is literally a piece of God, a godly piece of soul. Okay. Let's continue reading here. The description, let's read inside. The description of souls, literally, you want help opening that?
Yeah.
You have to push this this way. Okay, the description of soul as literally divine is striking. Since Jewish teachings are usually careful to emphasize a sharp distinction between creator and his creations. Rabbi Chaim Vital explains, the soul's light arises and flows from the light of 10 sphere, the 10 divine powers themselves, without any intermediary, which is why the verse states, you are children of your God. For a soul is like a child who is completely attached to his father, from whom his being flows. The application of the verse, the peace of God above, to describe this attachment of the soul dates back to Sapphic Kabbalist or Moshe Cordovero, Rabbi Elijah Dividas, remark statement. Okay, he's just telling us sources. As we've said many times, the Alter Rebbe is quoting from people before him. So what we have till now is that a soul is a piece of God. In other words, just as in a physical object, if you were to take a physical object and break it into pieces, let's say you take an apple and you break it into pieces. Every part of the apple has the DNA string. I actually don't know how apples work, but maybe other things. It has a piece of the DNA string of an apple. You know, if you dig it up, you can tell it's an apple, assuming there's vitality in it. So even though it's only a part of the apple, in a way, it has the entire being of the apple in it. So when you take the essence of something, you take a part of it, you actually have the entire being of it. Okay? Now this plays a role. If we are a piece of God, that is actually why our souls always have wanted to connect to God. The Jewish soul always wants to connect to God. And sometimes it's hidden, but when it comes out, it comes out suddenly. It just wants to connect to God. Because if you're a piece of God, then that's what you want to connect to. Right? Now we can understand. This is what it wants to connect to.
I hear a metaphor.
Huh?
I hear a metaphor.
You hear a metaphor? Okay.
You
what?
are what you eat.
You are what you eat. Okay.
And here it is.
Here you are what you are.
Yes.
You are what you are. Okay.
Peace of God.
Okay. So now we're going to go to the Alter Rebbe's first example. Alter Rebbe's first example. Or does he say it in the first? You know, I lost it. I closed my book. Huh?
Man's creation.
Okay, so he's actually going to bring, you know, I'm going to explain both examples outside. One is man's creation, the other one is a father and a son. Okay, so let me ask this question and tell me what you think. What causes parents to love their children?
It's part of them.
It's a part of them, right?
Yeah.
It's not that, you know, the kid is so well behaved, because that's usually not the case, or at least a lot of the time. Sometimes they are, of course, but it's not, you know, just that you are in charge of them, but they are a part of you. That's the ultimate reason a parent will stick up for their child no matter what. They are not just, they are actually a part and parcel of who you are, a strand of your DNA, right? So what we're going to explain in a moment is that we are called, there are parents that don't love their children. Oh, yes, of course. There are parents that don't love their children. And like everything else, these are examples that depict to us they're never going to be perfect, because they are examples. They're not the same exact thing. However, on a whole, you could say parents love their children, right? On a whole, we could say that. And if they do love their children, why? The main reason is because they're a part of them. Okay. What? No. There are parents that don't have, those are the parents that don't have a Jewish soul. Well, the example is irrespective of the Jewish parents or not Jewish parents. Children are a part of their parents. And so therefore any parent should, in theory, love their children because they are a part of them. Can you deny, obviously your animal soul, anybody's animal soul can get in the way of their inherent existence, but it's a subversion of the normal. 100%. A parent not loving their child is a subversion of the normal, whether Jewish or not Jewish parent. It's a subversion, 100%. Okay. The next thing is, the next example that we're going to have is that when we discuss how was the world created, we discuss the creation of the world. So again, one way we're going to show that we are a part of God is by showing you that we are the children of God. And if we are the children of God, that means we're a part of God. The second example we're going to give is from the creation of mankind. and obviously we'll have to explain, well, if all mankind are created that way, then doesn't that apply to everybody? But, we'll get to each piece as it comes. How was the world created? Anybody knows?
Other than what it's.
By 10.
How was the world created? Huh?
10 utterances, 10, this, is that what you mean?
Yeah, 10 utterances. Yep. So God spoke and the world came to be, right? Hu amarva. Yeah, God spoke and the world came to be. That is how the world was created. How was Adam and Eve created? Or Adam specifically, it says. How was Adam created?
Vayipach Hashem,
So before you get to that, how was he created?
by hand from the dust.
Right. God took the earth, and it says he formed Adam, literally out of the earth. So in a way, our bodies are lower. Okay, if you want to think of it like this. Thought is the highest level of our being. Speech is lower, and action is even lower. In a sense, in other words, what's closest connected to us? What's closest connected to my being is my thought, then is my speech, then is my action. So the rest of the world was created through speech. So somewhat of a separation from God himself, but still connected. Adam himself was formed by God's hands, so to speak. God doesn't have hands, but formed action. So we are in a way the lowest, okay? Our bodies are in a way the lowest. Yet at the same time, as Tzipora was saying, when God came to give a soul into mankind, it says, Vayipach biyapov, God blew into his nostrils a soul, a living soul. Now, why the importance of blowing a soul into him? Don't forget, the other animal kingdoms, God didn't have to blow a soul into them. He said, let there be cows, and poof. If he didn't, poof, there were cows, living cows. So why would he blow into them? What does blowing show on? Or let's put it this way, what's the difference between blowing and speaking?
The ruach, the spirit.
Okay, I'm talking on a very physical level, Let's differentiate first on a very human lingo. What's the difference? What's a major difference between blowing and speaking? Huh?
That's where it comes from.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, you were talking about the gastric.
Yeah,
So blowing comes from the diaphragm and the lungs.
the diaphragm in the lungs.
Whereas speaking actually comes from vocal cords.
Uh-huh.
In the structure of the mouth.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, okay. All right. Well, let me
They-
give an example.
They come from different.
There are some people that come to shul and they talk. And they can seemingly talk for hours. Okay, they can go on and talk as many times as they keep talking, right? So people can talk. You can talk and talk for hours and not get tired. However, try blowing balloons for hours. Okay, try blowing. You can only do that for so long.
Right.
You can only blow for so long. Talking can go on forever and ever and ever and ever. Obviously, there's a limit to everything because we're physical beings. But the general idea is that blowing is much more difficult, which means it's taking out more of your energy than speaking. Speaking takes less of your energy. Blowing takes up more of your energy. So when the Torah describes God blows into Adam's nostrils, it doesn't mean God literally came there and like I do go, because God is not a physical form. But when the Torah uses a description, it's trying to give over a point. It's trying to tell us an idea. What is the idea? Now that we understand the distinction between blowing and talking, now we understand. God was giving more of his kishkas, as you might say, more of his inside to us. That's why it says, Vayipach biyapov nishmat chaim. He blew into his nostrils a living soul, to describe to us that the soul that we have is not just like the other souls, which are from a more external aspect of godliness. We are more internal. We are more a part of God than any other being and creation. Right? Okay. Now, to answer the question, you might tell me, okay, so the fact that God blew, that shows that our soul is a piece of God. But then that would apply to everybody. That would apply to Jews and non-Jews alike, because Adam, the progenitor of all mankind. So like most questions in Judaism, we wouldn't be the first ones to come up with it. The Arizal himself, the holy Ari, as we discussed who he was, the great Kabbalist and Safed, upon many of his works, the Tanya is based off of, writes like this, and I'm going to translate over here. I'm going to read the text over here. It's not in your book, but I'm going to translate for you. When God created the first man, all the souls were included in him. In other words, Jewish, non-Jewish, all souls were a part of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve are what's called general souls. From them, all souls are split up. Okay? And if Adam would have never sinned, we would have had the Mashiach right away, so to speak. It would have been the Messianic era. And everybody would have been Jewish. It all would have been a Jewish world. However, after he sinned, our mission, so to speak, changed, and how the world order would happen was going to take a much longer route. Okay, and now Adam had souls of both Jewish and non-Jewish souls, and however, when God blew into his nostrils, that happened before the sin, when the original intention was that there would be just one nation. Okay, that didn't work out, and we've had a discussion on that in one of our classes. However, we do find in scripture elsewhere, it says Atem Kuriyim Adam, or Adam Atem. You are called Adam. It says in scripture, you are called Adam, meaning Jewish people are called Adam. We have those sparks of the soul that was blown in. And one place where we see this clearly is the cave of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, Ma'arat HaMachpelah, Hebron. For those who know, in Hebron in Israel, where the patriarchs and matriarchs are buried, Adam and Sarah, Isaac and Rebecca, Jacob and Leah, they're buried there. Why did Abraham buy that plot of land? Because Adam and Eve were buried there. So this is one example of how we are a continuation, the Jewish people are a continuation of that godly soul that was given to Adam. And by the way, this is what it means to be Jewish. So when people say, what does it mean to be Jewish? What's the answer? What it means to be Jewish is to have the Jewish soul. The Jewish soul is a very special godly soul. Again, this is not to put down people who aren't Jewish, as we've spoke about in the last class, and they also can get heaven and whatnot. But we obviously do believe that we as Jews have something special. It comes with an obligation. It's a lot harder, but we do believe we have a special soul. At the same time, we're not racist against anybody. Anybody who wants to become Jewish can become Jewish. And we also believe that anybody who's not Jewish and wants to live a good lifestyle and a godly lifestyle can do so and be rewarded by God as such, and get heaven and be in the times of Mashiach and everything else. But if you want the harder job, you're gonna have to convert. It's not a free for all. Or you can be born into it, like most of us are. You get born into it, and you get, by virtue of being born to a Jewish mother, you get a godly soul. So there's two ways to get to get this godly, special godly soul. I should say the Jewish godly soul, a portion of God, literally, either through birth or through conversion. Okay, so I think we have described the two proofs, if you want to call them, or areas where we see that our soul is a godly soul. Number one is the fact that we will be called children of God, specifically the Jewish people. In fact, we had it. Someone asked, if you were born to a Jewish father, don't you get the soul too? Judaism is matrilineal descent. Judaism typically comes through the mother. in traditional Judaism. I think conservative may have switched over a couple of years ago. No,
I don't think so.
they still go matrilineal. Yeah, definitely reform. But yeah, Judaism is matrilineal. There's verses that show that to be the case. So Judaism is matrilineal descent. Tribal affiliation comes from the father in Judaism, right? So if you want to be a priest or you want to be from the tribe of Judah or whatever, but Judaism is about matrilineal descent. If you want to go with the now there's spiritual reasons why, but if you want to go technical reasons, if you want to think about the technicalities of it, back in the day before there were paternity tests, you would always know who somebody's mother was. You wouldn't necessarily know who their father was. Okay. In other words, you can 100% know who somebody's mother is.
Yeah.
Can't 100% know who their father is. I mean, today you can. But again, that's just from a technical perspective. That's not the reason why God made it that it goes to the mother. Okay. But no worries. Someone can also get the Jewish soul, can convert as well. So there are ways to if somebody wants it.
Rabbi, but the person who converts, like you said, is already a Jewish soul trapped in a.
So the person who converts does not have the full manifestation of their godly soul before they convert. They have a glimmer of it, which pushes them to convert. Only once they convert do they fully get the godly soul.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah. Okay. So here we have. Okay, so we spoke about the two proofs, right? One is child-parent relationship, and the other one is God's breath. Did I miss anything in the chat? I think I covered them all. Okay. All right, so let us go to back inside the text now that we have explained it outside. Hopefully now the text will go smoothly. Okay, so here he is going to give us the examples that tell us, he's going to give us the text that tell us that we have, from where do we know that we have a godly soul? Okay. The idea of a divine soul is suggested by the verse describing man's creation. And God blew into his nostrils the breath of life, Genesis 2:7. Nachmanides, the Ramban, as opposed to Rambam, an early Spanish Kabbalist, was the first to explain this verse as evidence of a divine soul. This verse hints for us the virtue of the soul. It states that God breathed into his nostrils a soul of life. To inform you, the soul is not derived from the elements, rather it is the Spirit of God that is Nachmanides. Okay, so again, breath denotes the inners of God. And here we're going to quote, so that's the verse. Now we're going to quote from our morning prayers. Every morning when we get up, we're supposed to say a prayer like this: Elokai neshama, Elokai, my God, neshama, the soul, shenasatabi, that you have given it to me, tohorahi. Ata barata, you have created it. Ata yetzarta, you have formed it. Ata va'ata nefachtabi, and you have breathed it into me. And so this is the verse he's quoting over here. He's quoting from our prayers. Every single morning we get up, we say this prayer, thanking God for our soul, and we say, you have breathed it into me. And so here again, we see that our soul is breathed into us. And here he tells us from the Zohar, as the sages of the Zohar state, that unlike speaking, which uses relatively little breath, one who blows from his innards, meaning from the innermost depths of his being. For when a person blows forcibly, he exhales with a deep-rooted inner energy. The biblical metaphor of blowing, we're on page 45, the biblical metaphor of blowing in man's souls suggests that God has deep inner attachment with the soul, in distinctions to the rest of the creation, which arose through more superficial speech of God. While the Tanya refers to this teaching as a teaching of the Zohar, it's not found in our Zohar. Okay, it's not important. A further teaching which illustrates the intimate connection between the second soul and God is the midrashic idea of the Jewish people rising in God's mind prior to creation, which connects to us being a child. Okay. says like this. In the same vein, the Medrash depicts the Jewish souls as having arisen in the mind of God before the creation of the world. Genesis says, the Medrash Rabbah says, Yisrael alu b'machshava. In other words, think about it like this. When you build a house, you have a vision of the completed house before you create it, right? Before you build it, hopefully. Otherwise, your contractor is going to hate you. You know, they just want a house. So the Medrash tells us that the Jewish people arose in God's mind even before he created the world. So he knew each and every single one of us before the world was created. This intimate connection is also depicted scripturally as a parental relationship. We'll explain why this is important. As the verse states, Israel, my firstborn son. This was actually from this past week's Torah portion. In this past week's Torah portion, God tells Moses to come to Pharaoh and say, Beni Bechori Yisrael, Israel, my firstborn son, let them go, right? So that is the verse from this past week's Torah portion. Similarly, we have in Deuteronomy, God says, Banim atem l'Hashem Elokeichem, you are children to God, your God. So we're going to say, what is the connection between the Midrash idea of a soul arising from the mind of God and the biblical metaphor of souls as children of God? It's one and the same.
Yeah, we're just
We're part of God's mind.
exactly.
That's what he says. To clarify this point, the Tanya enters a discussion which will be central to our chapter concerning the spiritual origins of a child in his or her father. This means that just as a child is derived from the brain of the father, likewise, each person in Israel is derived from God's blessing through thought and wisdom, so to speak. So you might be asking, Rabbi, what are you talking about? A child is derived from the brain of the father. So let's take a look here. It's a very interesting thing. Very, very interesting. I remember talking to Chaim Miller about this before he wrote the translation. Anyways, from antiquity until the early modern period, it was believed that the male seed was physically derived from the cerebral matter of the brain, passing down the spine and exiting through a duct at the spine's base. So when the Alter Rebbe actually wrote the Tanya, that's what people believed, that it would come from your brain, drip down. While this was later shown to be anatomically, is that the right way to say it? Anatomically incorrect. The Kabbalists accepted the brain spine seed pathway as spiritually valid. In one of his discourses, Rabbi Shneir Zalman made it clear that he understood the idea non-literally. It must be a spiritual power that emerges from the brain, Torah or 16a. Here the Tanya uses this brain seed child connection to illustrate how children of God are connected with the thought and wisdom of God their Father. But this only demonstrates how the soul is connected with God's wisdom. How are we to explain that every soul is a piece of God himself? Okay, so we have to unpack this. Because this is kind of a strange concept, right? We're saying that the soul is coming from the brain. Okay, we're saying a human being is coming from the brain of their father, right? Now, the truth is, even though today anatomically, we don't actually physically come from the brain of the father, but without the brain, nothing would happen, right? You need the brain's involvement in intimacy. You have to be interested, okay? So to a large extent, there is a connection between the brain of the father and the child. On top of that, of course, as we know, once you add in DNA in there, we completely understand that that the child has a complete strand of DNA of the parent, right? Although actually it's a mixture, but to an extent. But the point is that a child starts in the deepest place of the parent. Okay, but ultimately, it becomes a very physical being. That's really the idea over here. In other words, the child starts in the brain, but what comes out from that brain is a physical being all the way to the toenails. Okay, what's the point of it here? Similarly, we're going to say is that even though a physical child seems very distant, the nails, let's go with toenails, most, lowest part of the body, even though toenails seem very distant from your brain, right? Nevertheless, that's where it comes from. So too, although we living here on this earth may seem to be so distant from God, we are actually a part of God. Just as the toenails are coming in a part of the Father's brain, so too, the soul, the godly soul, comes down to this earth, and it comes from God's brain, so to speak, as we'll explain. But nevertheless, once it comes all the way down here, it is something very, very special. Any questions or comments? Because I know it's a very interesting topic. No?
No, you're not saying like the physical brain, you're just saying thoughts and ideas. That's where it comes from. A child comes from a thought.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's take a look here in the text. Let's take a look. Again, I know all this is heavy stuff.
Well,
We're establishing important concepts to help us later on. Okay, so we said like this, but this only demonstrates how the soul is connected with God's wisdom. How are we to explain that every soul is a piece of God himself, right? Are you your wisdom, right? In other words, if we are to say that we come from God's wisdom, who says we're a part of God? So he says like this, to answer the question, Tanya will now probe the unique quality of God's wisdom, how it differs from human wisdom. Concerning God's wisdom, the Tikkunis are states, he is wise, but not with wisdom as we know. God's wisdom and our wisdom is different. The way God knows something is fundamentally different to the way human beings know things. A person and his knowledge remain two separate entities. Information is something acquired, right?
Yeah.
Information is something that you acquire. There was something that was separate from you, and you have to understand it, right? In other words, there is the knowledge, and there's the knower, and there's the known. If I want to really confuse you, there's the knowledge, there's the knower, and there's the known. So let's take a piece of, there's the known item, is the plastic cup. There's the knowledge about the plastic cup, and there's me that I know about the plastic cup, okay? So again, there's the knowledge about the plastic cup, there's the knower, which is me, and there's the known, which is the plastic cup itself. Those are all three separate things. There's me, there's my knowledge. How do I know me and my knowledge are different? Because if I didn't have the knowledge about the plastic cup, I would still be me. That means my knowledge about the plastic cup is not me. It's something I acquire, but in my suitcase, so to speak.
yeah.
Okay? And then there's the known, there's the plastic cup itself. Now, this would be a problem. However, God's knowledge doesn't work that way. God doesn't get smarter, okay? God doesn't get smarter when things happen, okay? God doesn't get wiser when he learns something, right? We cannot say God didn't know something and now he knows it, right? You can't say God didn't know about plastic cups and now he knows about plastic cups. That means he was lacking something before. So the way we go about it is we say God's knowledge about plastic cups, so to speak, was always a part of him. So unlike me, my knowledge is separate from me. His knowledge is a part of him. Similarly, the known object, also to an extent, now God is not a plastic cup, but there's nothing in the world that's separate from God. So the cup cannot be separate from God. So in other words, these three things that we separate in ourselves, the knower, the known, and the knowledge, in God is all one. He is the knower, the known, and the knowledge all at once. All of that is to say, is that if we come from God's thought, if we come from God's brain, so to speak, God's intellect, then we are a piece of God himself, because God's knowledge is not separate from him. That's what we're getting to. So let's read that again. Concerning God's wisdom, Tikkunis states, he is wise, but not with wisdom as we know it. The way God knows something is fundamentally different to the way humans know things. A person and his knowledge remain two separate entities. Information is something acquired. But in the case of God, he and his wisdom are one, as the Rambam writes. Rambam Maimonides explains that unlike humans, God has simultaneously the power to know, the knower, and the known. Now he's going to say something here which should be obvious to us, but as he's going to say, but this concept defies coherent mortal comprehension. Okay? In other words, we can hear the concept that God is the knower, the known, and the knowledge, but we cannot actually fully grasp it. It's not within our ability. As the verse states, can you find God by searching? And it is also written, for my thoughts are not your thoughts. Isaiah, paraphrase from Mishnah Torah, Law of Foundations. The point is that we can hear the concept about God. We can understand why it has to be that way, but ultimately, we cannot fully comprehend it because it's something that is just beyond our comprehension. So all this, just one second, let me move on to this one last line. In conclusion, the Tanya offers us two metaphors to illustrate the intimate union of the divine soul with God. A was blown from God's innards, which means we are coming a piece of God himself. Number B, it is derived from God's wisdom, which is totally one with him. How we understand God, can we fully grasp the idea that God is one with his wisdom? No. But we can appreciate that we are called the children of God. And by extension, we're called children of God, just as a child comes from the brain of a parent, at least spiritually. So too we come from, so to speak, quote unquote, the intellect of God. And since God and his intellect are one, by extension, we are a piece of God. Yes, question. You had a question, right? Yes?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh,
You about to
no,
say something?
no, I'm just putting it in terms I can understand. I've got it, it's context. You bring you have a context about plastic cup, right?
Right.
You know it in its form, it's the knowledge,
Have a
knows?
knowledge about it.
But you bring a plastic cup to an aborigine in Australia who's never seen a plastic cup, and they don't know the aspects. It's like
Right,
unknown,
so
but God knows everything. It's divine.
Right. So I like the Aborigine example. So if you give them a plastic cup, if we want to differentiate between the knowledge, the knower, and the known,
Yeah.
they may have the known, which is the plastic cup,
Right.
but they don't have knowledge about the
Right.
plastic
There's
cup.
no context.
There's no knowledge about it.
Yeah.
But typically, again, there's the knower, which is me, there's the known, which is the cup, and there's my knowledge about it.
Right.
And God is all three at once. Why? A, we cannot say that God gains more knowledge.
Right.
It means he wasn't perfect before. So the knowledge had to be a part of him before. And the known is everything is part of God. Nothing is separate from him.
Right.
So his knowledge is very, very different from ours. But as Maimonides himself says, don't try and fully wrap your mind around this because you're never going to fully grasp it. Okay, so to summarize what we said today, in addition to the vivifying soul, the animalistic soul, which gives life to our body, every single Jewish person has a holy soul, which is called Chelek Elokam Imal, a literal piece of God, which is entirely godliness, because it comes from the insides of God. And therefore, we have two expressions about the soul. One is that God blew into his nostrils. That denotes us coming from God's kishkas. Number two, we are called God's children. And all of these examples show on the idea that there is an inner connection between God and us. In other words, a very, very inner connection. In other words, you can be connected to certain things in this world. Some are more external, some are more internal. So, for example, hopefully food is more external than, let's say, your relationship with your children, right? Okay, you eat it, it becomes a part of you. I'm just trying to think. In other words, there are many things that we deal with in our lives. Some are more internal, some are more external. Well, I think a good example is a car and a house. A car, I would say, is more external than a house. It's more internal, integral to you. I'm just throwing out examples. I didn't think about it before. So just trying to depict to you that you have different relationships with different things.
Yeah, convenience versus survival.
Convenience versus survival. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you could go with that. If you want to go with that, you can go a house, shelter versus food. Food is more important, right?
But it's shelter.
But it's not just about survival, but it's about what is really important. You know, survival is important, but survival for what? What are you surviving for? Now, all of this discussion is very important to the general discussion of the Tanya, because the whole purpose of the Tanya is to explain how we can serve God with our heart, right? We want to know how do we want to know how is it easy that our heart should love God. And the question is, well, how could I love God? I'm a physical being. I love cheesecake and ice cream. How can I love God? And so here we're already getting an inkling. We're already getting a hint. How is it easy for us to love God? Number one, it's already built into you. Okay, putting your animal soul aside, if you can ignore him for a moment, we'll discuss animal soul more later. But your godly soul is a piece of God himself. You have a soul that is godly, that is always naturally connected to God. And because of this godly soul, you will always be able to love God. And throughout the Tanya, we will learn techniques and ways how we can uncover our godly soul, how we can reveal our godly soul, how we can let our godly soul shine. But the first point that we're trying to say here today is you have a soul in you which is godly. And if you want to love God, the path towards loving God is not that hard. Now that we have described to you, you have this godly soul, it's a piece of God. If you can learn the techniques to reveal it, let it shine, then you come to love God. So you don't have to work on yourself and change your being. That's a lot harder. Changing is a lot harder than revealing your inner essence. And so that is lesson number one that we're walking away with today. As I always said, every class is going to be part of a general idea, but also there's going to be a lesson that we can live with today. The lesson today that you have is that you have a godly soul, and therefore love of God is not unnatural to you, it's natural to you, but you do have to spend time to reveal it. How do you reveal it? I'm sure you've already have experience that you know some ways to do it, and the other ways to reveal it, of course, you will learn as we go throughout the Tanya. And that is the field for today. We will now accept any questions or comments, and I'm going to stop the recording.